Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really common point of confusion in our everyday conversations about the world. We hear it on the news constantly. A country's economy is absolutely booming, wealth is skyrocketing, and the numbers are just through the roof. But hold on a second. Does a country simply getting wealthier actually mean its people are living better lives? Well, that's exactly what we're going to answer today. So, let's just dive right into the central question of our analysis. If a country gets richer, does life automatically get better? It turns out economists use two very different concepts to answer this. We have economic growth, which is strictly a numbers game. It's quantitative. And then we have economic development, which is qualitative. Now, people use these terms interchangeably all the time, but as we're going to see, they represent two profoundly distinct realities for the folks actually living in that economy.
To really wrap our heads around this, picture two kids. Child number one grows taller and gains weight every single year. That's growth. They are simply getting physically bigger. Now look at child number two. This kid also grows physically, sure, but they also learn math, they develop communication skills, they stay healthy, and they mature emotionally. That is development. Growth means getting bigger. Development means getting better. A country might become massively rich, but unless its people actually become healthier and more educated, genuine development simply hasn't happened.
Part 1. Measuring economic growth.
Okay, so looking strictly at the numbers side first. When economists want to measure how much bigger an economy is getting, they almost always start right here with gross domestic product, or GDP. Put simply, it's the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country's borders over a year. It's basically measuring the pure expansion of an economy. Higher production, higher income, more stuff being made. But remember, this is entirely objective. If GDP goes from 2 trillion to 2.2 trillion, boom, the economy experienced a 10% economic growth. But, and this is a big but, that number alone tells us absolutely nothing about whether poverty has actually fallen or if schools have improved.
Now, you've probably also heard of GNP, or Gross National Product. The difference between the two is actually pretty straightforward. GDP focuses purely on the location of production, while GNP focuses on the ownership of production. Let me give you an example. Say an Indian company earns profits from a factory they own over in Germany. The actual physical production counts toward Germany's GDP, right? Because that's where the factory is located. But the income counts toward India's GNP, because an Indian company owns the whole shebang.
But to track true growth, we got to look at the math. Let's say a country announces its GDP grew by 8%. That is what we call nominal GDP, meaning it's measured using current market prices. But what if prices just went up everywhere? What if things just cost more? That's where real GDP comes in, and it is a real game changer. Real GDP adjusts for inflation. So if nominal GDP goes up by 8%, but inflation is running at 5%, you have to subtract that inflation. Your real GDP growth is actually only 3%. Figuring out the real GDP is absolutely crucial because it strips away the illusion of higher prices and gives us a much clearer picture of actual production increases.
Finally, to figure out what all this growth means for an actual, everyday person, economists use GDP per capita. This is just the total GDP divided by the population. It estimates the average piece of the economic pie available per person. Take India and Luxembourg, for instance. India has one of the largest total GDPs in the world, but it also has a population of over 1 billion people. Luxembourg, on the other hand, has a much smaller total GDP, but its population is roughly the size of a medium American city. Because of that, Luxembourg has a drastically higher GDP per capita. But, and keep this in mind, even this doesn't tell us how that income is actually distributed among the people on the ground.
Part 2. Measuring economic development.
All right, this is where we shift gears. We move away from asking how much and start asking how well. We're moving from pure expansion to actual improvements in human welfare. Because human well-being is incredibly complex, economists simply can't rely on a single number like GDP. Instead, they use these amazing multidimensional tools, like the Human Development Index, or HDI. Developed by the UN, the HDI assigns a country a score from 0 to 1, with higher values meaning greater human development. It completely changes the focus from pure production to actual lived human capabilities.
So how does it work? The HDI is broken down into 3 equally weighted slices. First up is health, which is measured by life expectancy at birth. Why? Because living a longer life generally points to better nutrition, solid health care, and good sanitation. Second is education, measured by the years of schooling people actually get. And third is the standard of living, which is adjusted for purchasing power parity, or PPP.
That PPP adjustment is so important because it levels the field. It accounts for the fact that a single dollar buys a whole lot more in some countries than it does in others. That's what makes these international comparisons actually mean something.
Now, to measure how that wealth is actually distributed across a population, economists look at the Gini coefficient. This is a scale that runs from 0 to 1. A 0 means perfect equality. Everyone has the exact same amount. A 1, on the other hand, means perfect inequality. Literally, one person has everything. So why does this matter? Well, a country can experience rapid, explosive GDP growth, but if all that new money is just being hoarded by a tiny group at the top, the Gini coefficient is going to shoot right up toward 1. It basically tells us, hey, growth is happening, but it is absolutely not being shared.
But we want to look even closer, right? Enter the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI. Traditional ways of measuring poverty usually just look at whether someone falls below an income line. But the MPI recognizes that true poverty is a simultaneous deprivation of basic everyday needs. It looks at whether a household is lacking nutrition, years of schooling, electricity, safe drinking water, decent sanitation, housing, or even cooking fuel. If a family is deprived in several of these areas all at once, they are multidimensionally poor. This paints a much more realistic picture of poverty on the ground than a simple income threshold ever could.
Part 3. When growth isn't enough.
So what exactly happens when the numbers go up, but people's daily lives just stay flat? There are a few specific situations where massive economic growth completely fails to turn into actual economic development. First is high income inequality. Imagine a country strikes oil. GDP goes through the roof. But if those profits are locked up by a few elites or lost to a corrupt government, ordinary citizens won't see a single new school or hospital. Second is jobless growth. Think about automation or AI. They can massively boost production and raise GDP, but they might create very few new jobs, leaving unemployment stubbornly high. Then you have environmental degradation. A rapid industrial boom might juice short-term GDP, sure, but if it causes severe air and water pollution, it completely undermines long-term health and development. And finally, weak public services and poor governance. If a government doesn't invest its new wealth into public transit, digital infrastructure, or transparent institutions, the broader public is never going to actually feel that growth.
Part 4. The ultimate goal.
So how do these two ideas actually play out together in the real world to build a thriving nation? Here is the absolute core distinction. Economic growth is about increasing production. It's strictly quantitative, it focuses purely on the economy, and its outcome is simply a bigger economy. Economic development, on the flip side, is about improving the overall quality of life. It's both quantitative and qualitative. It focuses on the economy and the society as a whole, and its ultimate outcome is a better society. Real development requires actual, deep, structural change, like modernizing agriculture or vastly expanding public infrastructure.
And honestly, the relationship between the two is summed up perfectly by this idea. Economic growth is a necessary but not sufficient condition for economic development. Growth is absolutely vital. You have to have it. It pays the bills, it creates investment opportunities, and it generates the tax revenue a country desperately needs. But growth by itself, just not enough. Development is what determines how effectively those massive financial resources are actually transformed into lasting improvements in human well-being through smart policies and solid institutions.
Which leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Economic growth is the tool. It's the means to an end. But a truly successful, thriving economy isn't defined just by the sheer size of its GDP. It's defined by its ability to actually improve the lives, the opportunities, and the well-being of all its citizens, today and for generations to come. So the next time you hear on the news that an economy is booming, don't just get blinded by the dollar signs. Ask yourself, is the country just getting bigger, or are its people actually getting better? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this helps you look at the daily economic news in a completely new way.